Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Today is day 61 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings and featured testimony from Halifax Regional Police Chief Dan Kinsella. Now, Chief Kinsella is actually still testifying as I record this. He's answering questions from National Police Federation lawyer Natasha Najawan. I watched Chief Kinsella's evidence up until now, and it seemed like most of what he wanted to say or was probably going to be asked has been asked. I'm going to watch the rest of it as well, and if anything else comes along, I'll certainly pick up on it in my next piece or on Twitter or wherever else if something significant comes up in his cross-examination. Seems like Chief Kinsella came in and had what he had to say, and he's given an interview, or sorry, not an interview, but has answered written questions in advance as well, and the Mass Casualty Commission will be posting those answers, I expect. They're not up on the website just yet. So before I talk about Chief Kinsella, two other things come up. One is, so yesterday at the end of the day, and it led off my video piece last night, was a comment from Chief Commissioner Michael McDonald, former Chief Justice McDonald, that to Brenda Lucki, the Commissioner of the RCMP, sort of extolling her to make sure that she becomes a champion of the recommendations that emerge from the Mass Casualty Commission, that she not only, accepts them, but that she, advocates for them internally, pushes back on political pressure, does all that thing. Commissioner McDonald spent some time sort of making sure that Commissioner Luckey got the message, and in which she certainly appeared to have done. Now, I took that to be a sign that the Commission was unlikely to recommend the removal of the RCMP or the replacement of the RCMP as the sort of de facto provincial police force in Nova Scotia. It's been pointed out to me since, and I don't disagree with this, that another way to interpret that those comments from Commissioner McDonald would be to say, well, if there's a transition from the RCMP to another police force, to a regional model, to a provincial force, whatever the case may be in the recommendations, that Commissioner Luckey, as the head of the RCMP, support that she, cooperate with the transition, however that may unfold. So that's also a fair interpretation of that. I don't think that's exactly what Commissioner McDonald was trying to convey in that. However, certainly if that is the recommendation that emerges, we would expect the RCMP and certainly the Commissioner to be cooperative. Probably not agree with it. I don't know if they would. I actually doubt that they would support it. But that would be the urge from the Commission, from the Mass Casualty Commission. So that was one thing. Second thing was, and this I mentioned this a couple of times with the RCMP officers, we saw it again today with Chief Kinsella, which is rather than wearing their police uniforms, their blues, their whatever, the officers that have been testifying in the Mass Casualty Commission have been wearing business suits, have been wearing civilian clothing. And so it came up, and finally, I guess enough people were asking the question that the Mass Casualty Commission, provided an answer to a media inquiry. And so the answer is that the Mass Casualty Commission has asked that RCMP witnesses, police witnesses, I guess, in general, not wear the uniform out of concern or consideration for people that are watching either in person or over the live stream, that might be triggered by seeing the police uniform. And certainly that there are people that are experiencing that. I understand, I've spoken to them personally, and so that's the reason. Not sure that's a great reason. I mean, to me, if you're there representing an organization, we saw this with the fire chiefs that were there. They were wearing their uniforms. Police chief, you're there as a police chief. You're not there in your individual capacity. Anyway, perhaps it's not a big issue, but that's the explanation anyway. The Mass Casualty Commission made the request, and the officers have all, of course, complied with it. So that was an interesting little revelation. So it's not a strategy on the part of the RCMP specifically, or the police generally, to sort of soften their images before the Mass Casualty Commission. That was the direction. All right, so Chief Kinsella. Chief Kinsella had two sort of broad topics to discuss. One was the Halifax Regional Police reaction or involvement in the events of April 18, 19, 2020. And the second is sort of this concept of policing in Nova Scotia, interoperability, the relationships among the police forces, and specifically between the Halifax Regional Police and the RCMP. Interestingly now, Chief Kinsella did not sit down for an interview with the commission lawyers or anybody beforehand, did respond in writing to questions, and so has provided some answers, but didn't sit down for an interview. It's a little unusual. Wouldn't necessarily read too much into it, other than the Halifax Regional Police trying to be extra careful, I guess, about their answers, which I'm not sure they have particular reason to be all that careful. Chief Kinsella certainly didn't seem to be hesitant in his answers in person today. Gave long answers and detailed answers to questions. Didn't seem to be holding back on any topics. So, not sure what to read into the fact that he gave written responses. Written responses are usually not as good as in-person responses. Aren't considered as credible because you have a team that's helping you prepare them. You have all kinds of time to do so. You can't be put on the spot in the same way as you can in a one-on-one interview. So a few topics. One is the issuance of the emergency alert. We've heard that the RCMP and other police forces were given the opportunity to have direct access in 2016. Doesn't sound like the Halifax Regional Police have ever used the emergency alert in an active shooter or an ongoing criminal situation. But Chief Kinsella certainly said that he felt that the emergency alert should have been considered and done much earlier than it was. Well, it was never issued, but it should have been considered much earlier than it was. He was certainly aware of the option to use Alert Ready, and had Wortman made his way into Halifax Regional Police jurisdiction, that an alert would almost certainly have been issued. And then definitely if EMO, Emergency Management Office, had asked Halifax Regional Police, do you want this emergency alert issued? He would have said absolutely yes. So unlike the RCMP, who were given the opportunity and then took forever to try to start drafting one, Halifax Regional Police, easy to say now perhaps, but that was Chief Kinsella's answer, that he was aware of it and would have used it at the time. Talking about interoperability and operational things, the emergency response team, Chief Kinsella said, yes, there's technological radio issues sometimes, but none of those affected the response of the police on April 18th, 19th, 2020. None of those were issues that affected the operational details to try to capture Wortman as he was going through. Though, of course, the Halifax Regional Police were notified of things that were going on. They assisted with checking in on Wortman's property in Dartmouth, had received the photo of the vehicle from Maureen Banfield and passed that on to the RCMP, but were not asked to, and didn't of their own volition, take their emergency response team and send it up to Truro or send it up into the Colchester area to sort of help or cut off Wortman before he got to the city. They felt they were ready and prepared should he get into HRM, but didn't do anything more proactive than that. I'm not sure there's anything to criticize there. If the Halifax Regional Police may have reasonably thought that the RCMP had things under control, seems like some of the communications from the RCMP to the Halifax Regional Police would have suggested that that was the case. Not at all times, but certainly broadly speaking. So interoperability didn't seem to be an issue at that point. So relationships between the two forces and the forces in Nova Scotia generally. We heard a lot today about how the RCMP were removed from the executive of the Nova Scotia Association of Police Chiefs, not removed from the association, but made associate members, not executive members. Chief Kinsella says after that, the RCMP stopped showing up to committee meetings, but there have been no operational issues as a result of that breakdown. He said it wasn't something that was done just suddenly. There was lots of discussions that took place and things that the RCMP were being asked to do in order to maintain their status within that association, but it just wasn't done. There is training that is going on within the two organizations. The emergency response teams train together at times, and they're always sort of thinking of ways to help out each other. In particular, Chief Kinsella mentioned just recently when the Heidi Stevenson Memorial took place just a few weeks ago that he contacted the RCMP, offered to send officers to take calls in the Cold Harbor area, other areas, to allow more officers to attend the memorial. Another thing he mentioned, though, just in terms of trying to get along and being proactive, he talked about the Wortley report, which was a report done a couple of years ago, I guess now, on street checks in Halifax, and disproportionate number of street checks that were done on African Nova Scotians. People of color were being stopped vastly disproportionately, and so there was a report done on that. Well, Chief Kinsella felt, and eventually did, issue an apology on behalf of the Halifax Regional Police. He contacted the RCMP to say, well, you're in Halifax as well. Would you like to participate in this apology to, the people affected? And the RCMP said no. So there is, again, I don't know why they wouldn't have participated in that. We didn't hear anything on the RCMP side of it, but that was the case. So they're trying to get along, it seems at times, but there's still issues that remain. The other thing he talks about, though, which was interesting, he said this is unique in the country. He, as far as he understands, says the only place where there's two different reporting structures for the same jurisdiction. All right, so in Halifax, there's the Halifax Regional Police, but also on the sort of the rural parts of HRM, the RCMP polices. Well, not all completely rural, suburban and rural. So in that jurisdiction, the Halifax Regional Police, Chief Kinsella, reports to the Board of Police Commissioners and is accountable to the Board of Police Commissioners. Well, so does the RCMP Chief Superintendent, reports to the board, but only in an advisory capacity, does not take direction from the board. And in the same way, the Chief of the Halifax Regional Police reports to the CAO of Halifax Regional Municipality. The RCMP doesn't. They report to Ottawa. So it's just a distinction there. So versus local accountability, local oversight versus oversight from Ottawa within the RCMP organization rather than a civilian oversight body. So certainly a distinction that I think favors the Halifax Regional Police. That's a much better way to run a police organization, have local and civilian accountability rather than distant and within the RCMP accountability. So that was interesting. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was the Criminal Intelligence Bulletin from 2011. We've heard about this. It originated out of Halifax. An officer in Halifax got some information that Gabriel Wortman was looking to kill a police officer. Issued a bulletin. Wortman was living up, the information related more to Colchester, so it was passed on to the RCMP up there, and it's unclear whether anything was done with it. Well, Chief Kinsella says, well, he wasn't here then. He only came in 2019, so it wasn't his personal responsibility. But he said if those bulletins came to anybody's attention, or if they were if something was serious enough that a bulletin would be created, he said it should be followed up and actioned immediately, not put away to be thought about later or filed away for, well, we'll see if this guy does anything or something like that. Should be followed up and actioned immediately. Certainly didn't appear that anything like that was done. So some interesting stuff there. So on the Criminal Intelligence Bulletin, and just thinking on criminal intelligence bulletins and that area for a while, just recommend to people the latest article from Paul Palango, published in Frank magazine, on Wortman and the issue of motorcycle gangs. There's some great detail in that article about how the Hells Angels and other gangs who had been kicked out of Nova Scotia years ago were working their way back in, and all of the timing connections that, a certain operation that was taking place where Wortman may have been involved ended just about 10 days prior to the shooting rampage and the killings. And there's some suggestion that Wortman was, he said at the end of these operations is the riskiest time because the bad guys have been put away. People are starting to figure out who may have been the confidential informants, those sorts of things. So circumstantial evidence, certainly, but really interesting read. I'd recommend that to people. It's behind a paywall, but you should subscribe to get all your good information that way. Okay, so that's it for today. I'm going to watch the rest of the evening now proceedings, see if anything of great note comes along, and I'll bring that to your attention. There's no proceedings tomorrow. We're back Monday. There's nothing on the calendar yet. I've spoken to some of the participants. It seems like there's going to be some roundtable discussions involving family members, other participants, the police organizations, to start flushing out some recommendations. And what I said about this before was that I think the Mass Casualty Commission is going to start putting some recommendations out, almost like a political organization would. Put out these ideas, test drive them, see how it goes, see what the feedback is informally, and then if it's positive or if something can be refined into something that's workable, then that will form the recommendation. So we're going to see some of these sort of draft recommendations, I think, come out over the next few weeks, starting Monday. So we don't know who that's going to be on Monday. It's not up on the calendar yet. Hopefully we'll hear something at the end of the day today, or perhaps tomorrow in a late Friday media release. We'll watch for that. Anyway, that's everything for today, day 61 of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.